World War II was supposed to be a war of reason, fought with science, industry, and logic. Yet behind the machinery, behind the grand strategies and coded telegrams, there were moments that defied all explanation. Soldiers disappeared without a trace. Machines malfunctioned in ways engineers could never reproduce. Pilots described lights in the sky they swore were not of this earth. Historians call them anomalies. Veterans, decades later, still call them nightmares. It began in the Atlantic. Convoys crossing from New York to Liverpool reported strange magnetic disturbances long before radar or sonar contact with German submarines. Compasses spun wildly, radio transmissions distorted, and entire escort ships drifted off course for hours. The British Admiralty logged more than 70 such incidents between 1940 and 1943, each one unexplained. Some scientists blamed solar storms, others thought of secret German magnetic mines. But naval officers who experienced it firsthand said it felt different, like the sea itself was pulling at their instruments, distorting the rules of navigation. Then came the disappearances. The most documented happened in December 1942, when a squadron of British bombers vanished during a return flight from Norway. Their radar signatures were seen for 6 minutes, then gone. No wreckage, no distress call, no bodies ever found. The RAF investigation classified the case as lost unknown circumstances. It wasn't the last. In the Pacific, American transports vanished too. Between the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, C-47 aircraft disappeared under clear weather, flying standard routes. The Army Air Forces later admitted privately that meteorological conditions could not explain the simultaneous loss of 4 aircraft equipped with functioning radios. For the men on the ground, the war was already madness. But for the pilots and sailors who lived through these encounters, something darker seemed to lurk beyond logic. In 1944, U.S. Navy radar operators aboard the USS Langley tracked an unidentified formation moving at 600 miles per hour, faster than any known aircraft of the time. The contact appeared out of nowhere, hovered briefly, then vanished from the screen. The event was logged, then buried in classified archives under anomalous radar return. Decades later, when the file was declassified, experts still couldn't explain it. The radar sets had been calibrated, the operators experienced it wasn't a mirage, it wasn't a glitch. In Europe, the same year, Allied pilots flying night missions over Germany began reporting what they called Foo Fighters. Balls of light that followed their planes at impossible speeds, weaving between flak explosions and matching every maneuver. Some thought they were German secret weapons. Others believed they were atmospheric phenomena. The Air Technical Intelligence Command took the reports seriously enough to investigate. No German records ever revealed any project resembling what the pilots described. After the war, German and Japanese airmen admitted they had seen the same lights and thought the Allies had created them. Not every mystery came from the skies. In 1945, deep in the Black Forest, retreating German troops abandoned an underground research facility near Glocke. Inside, Allied forces discovered a partially assembled nuclear reactor, nothing unusual at first. But alongside it were blueprints for a device no one could identify, a rotating sphere suspended by magnetic bearings, powered by high-voltage generators. Local testimonies claimed the scientists called it Die Glocke, the bell. The few surviving witnesses described glowing plasma rings, strange radiation burns, and violent vibrations. To this day, the exact purpose of Die Glocke remains unknown. Some believe it was part of a propulsion experiment, others that it was a power generator gone wrong. What's certain is that all project members disappeared before Allied troops arrived. Their files were destroyed, their names erased. There were also stories that sounded too strange to be true, yet too consistent to ignore. In occupied Poland, German engineers working on radar jamming stations near the Baltic coast reported power surges that coincided perfectly with Allied bombing raids hundreds of kilometers away. They had no communication link, no radar range that far. Still, their instruments reacted as if detecting something massive approaching long before the first aircraft appeared. One surviving engineer, interviewed after the war, said it was as if the air itself knew the bombs were coming. Even on the ground, the unexplained found its way into war's chaos. Soviet soldiers fighting in the ruins of Stalingrad reported hearing phantom artillery barrages that left no craters. Entire platoons swore they heard advancing tanks only for silence to follow. Psychologists later attributed it to combat fatigue, but not every case fit the pattern. When the same phenomenon was heard by German soldiers on the opposite side of the Volga, even the skeptics stopped laughing. And then there were the stories the military refused to acknowledge publicly. A U.S. Navy file from 1943 details a failed experiment near Philadelphia, where an escort destroyer, the USS Eldridge, allegedly became invisible to radar and possibly to sight. The project, according to rumors, was tied to research on electromagnetic cloaking. Officially, the Navy denies anything extraordinary occurred, but declassified letters from crewmen suggest something unusual happened that day. Strong electromagnetic fields, dizziness, and, in some testimonies, optical distortion. Most historians dismiss it as exaggerated folklore, yet no official record ever explains why several of the ship's logs from that week were later reclassified. By the end of the war, these mysteries had piled up, scattered reports, buried archives, whispers among veterans who had nothing left to gain by lying. Historians tend to look away, preferring facts they can measure, names they can confirm. But for those who lived it, the war was not just fought in trenches or skies. It was fought in the shadows of something unknown, something that science could not quite reach, and perhaps still can't. As the guns fell silent in 1945, the world celebrated peace. But for many who had seen these things, there was no peace, only questions that would never find answers. War is chaos, but even chaos has rules. In the spring of 1940, during the German invasion of France, one event challenged every law of warfare and logic. Near the town of Arras, a French infantry battalion simply disappeared. They had been ordered to hold a railway junction, 450 men, fully armed, last seen digging trenches before dusk. When reinforcements arrived the next morning, the field was empty. No bodies, no weapons, no signs of combat. The ground was unscarred, as if they had never existed. British intelligence assumed capture, but weeks later, German reports stated they had encountered no resistance in that sector. After the war, the French government tried to trace the men through POW registries, Red Cross records, and family correspondence. Not a single name reappeared. To this day, the Arras battalion remains unaccounted for, one of the war's most complete disappearances. In the vastness of the Pacific, similar stories emerged. Entire patrol boats went silent in calm seas. In 1943, the USS O'Bannon reported chasing a radar contact through heavy fog off the Solomon Islands. The crew watched the blip vanish, reappear behind them, then vanish again. When the fog lifted, the ocean was empty. Days later, a Japanese sub-S logbook recovered by Allied forces described a phantom destroyer that chased them through mist before disappearing into thin air. Two enemies, the same night, the same sea, both convinced the other had been a ghost. At war's scale, human error explains many mysteries, but not all. One of the strangest occurred over the English Channel in August 1942. Radar operators at Dover detected a massive air formation approaching from France. Hundreds of signals. The Royal Air Force scrambled interceptors, yet the skies were clear. Pilots saw nothing. Minutes later, the blips faded. No German units had launched that morning, and Luftwaffe records confirm it. It was as if the war itself had conjured a phantom battle that never was. Engineers blamed radar interference, but not everyone agreed. In secret memos later declassified, Air Ministry scientists speculated about atmospheric reflections from unknown sources. One line in particular stands out. The radar echoes displayed structured formations, far too organized for mere noise. It was never solved. The war's unexplained phenomena didn't stop at the battlefield. In early 1945, U.S. Marines advancing through the Philippines found an abandoned Japanese tunnel complex filled with working generators, but no personnel. The food was warm, the lights still on. There were signs of a hasty departure, but not a single body. It was as though hundreds of soldiers had walked out and vanished into the jungle. Allied patrols searched for days. No footprints, no camps, nothing. Locals reported strange lights over the hills that night, but when Marines investigated, the jungle was silent. In the ruins of Europe, the inexplicable took other forms. When Allied bombers reduced Dresden to ashes in February 1945, one sector of the city, a few blocks in the Altmark district, survived almost untouched. The firestorm consumed everything around it, temperatures reaching 900 degrees Celsius. Yet that one area remained, buildings still standing, their interiors barely scorched. Investigators found no rational explanation. No water sources nearby, no concrete bunkers shielding it, just ordinary structures. When a physicist from the RAF asked the survivors how they lived, one woman replied, "The fire came, but it curved around us. And then there were the lights. Those persistent, inexplicable lights that appeared wherever the war raged hardest." German night fighters called them foyer. American pilots called them Foo Fighters. They appeared near bombers over Italy, over the Ardennes, over Tokyo Bay. Some thought they were St. Elmo's fire, a natural electrical discharge, but the behavior didn't fit. The lights moved with intent, followed formations, mirrored turns. They accelerated and stopped on command. By late 1944, U.S. intelligence opened an official file, Project Sign, later Project Twinkle, to study the phenomenon. One debriefing from a B-29 pilot describes a luminous sphere pacing our right wing for 10 minutes before ascending vertically and vanishing. Skeptics suggested secret German aircraft, but when captured Luftwaffe scientists were asked after the war, they laughed. "We saw them too," one replied, "and we thought they were yours." As the war dragged on, patterns began to emerge. The strangest incidents often occurred near heavy electromagnetic activity, radar installations, communication hubs, experimental weapon sites. In northern Germany, Allied scouts found entire power grids overloaded, generators fused as if struck by invisible lightning. In Japan, near Nagoya, entire radio networks collapsed for hours during clear weather. The same happened in Sicily, in Normandy, and around Moscow during key offensives. After the war, scientists from both sides compared notes. The conclusion was unsettling. None of these events had a consistent explanation. They weren't sabotage, weren't weather, weren't random. Something, or some unknown force, had interfered with the most advanced technology of its time. In 1946, a joint Anglo-American committee quietly compiled a report titled Anomalous Incidents, 1939 to 1945. Only fragments have survived. Referenced in post-war intelligence briefings. One declassified paragraph reads, "Observed phenomena occurred in correlation with military operations of significant scale. The pattern defies statistical coincidence. To the soldiers who lived through it, no explanation was needed. They knew the war had unleashed something beyond human control, not magic, not divine punishment, but something that thrived in the extremes, chaos, death, fear, radiation, noise, as if the war itself had awakened the unknown. And as the world celebrated peace in 1945, those who had seen these things wondered whether peace had truly come, or if the silence that followed was just another mystery waiting to be broken. It began, as most secrets do, in the shadows of research. In 1943, deep inside a Philadelphia naval yard, a small team of physicists worked under a project so classified that even their commanding officers knew little about it. It was said to involve magnetic fields, radar invisibility, and Einstein's unified field theory. The ship chosen was the USS Eldridge, a standard destroyer escort, modified with massive generators and high-voltage coils running through her hull. The goal was simple, on paper: make a ship invisible to radar. But what happened on the morning of October 28, 1943, was anything but simple. Eyewitnesses from nearby docks claimed the Eldritch shimmered a blue-green haze surrounding her hull, then vanished completely. Seconds later, a flash. When she reappeared, sailors were screaming. Some were disoriented, vomiting. A few were said to be missing. Others were reportedly found fused into the metal deck, their bodies embedded in solid steel. The Navy called it an equipment test. Officially, no records exist of any Philadelphia experiment, but years later, declassified letters from crewmen mention electrical storms that seem to bend light and a feeling of falling through space. Historians remain divided. Many dismiss it as exaggeration or confusion caused by a radar stealth trial gone wrong. Yet one undeniable fact remains. Several crew logs from that week were reclassified and later destroyed. The United States wasn't alone in chasing invisible power. In Nazi Germany, within the secretive SS and Unerb, scientists conducted equally bizarre experiments. One facility in Lower Silesia, disguised as a mine, was devoted to something they called Die Glocke, the bell. Witnesses after the war described a 2-meter-high metallic sphere suspended between rotating magnetic drums. When powered, it emitted violet light and an unbearable hum. Nearby plants died instantly. Animals used in testing decomposed within hours. Documents recovered by Polish intelligence referred to Chronos time. Even Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, admitted that certain occult research projects existed but were abandoned as the war turned. The Bell Project's true nature has never been proven. Some believe it was an attempt at anti-gravity propulsion. Others, a particle accelerator built without full understanding of its own radiation output. But what frightened Allied investigators most wasn't what they found. It was what they didn't. The scientists, the plans, and the core device all vanished weeks before the Soviets reached the site. Witnesses saw SS trucks leaving at night, heading toward the mountains. Nothing was ever recovered. In Britain, strange research was underway as well, not in secret bases, but in laboratories that flirted with the impossible. The Royal Air Force's telecommunications research establishment experimented with ghost radar returns, an early form of electronic countermeasure. But the tests sometimes produced something unplanned. Phantom echoes of aircraft that didn't exist. Operators would track them, watch them move in formations, then disappear mid-screen. The scientists called them afterminages of electromagnetic resonance. Pilots who scrambled to intercept them swore they saw flashes in the clouds, lights that danced like real machines. As war technology advanced, so did the strangeness. In 1944, both Allied and Axis forces began noticing failures that no engineer could explain. Engines would stop mid-air. Radios screamed with bursts of static, shaped like human speech. Compasses spun even far from the poles. The U.S. Army's signal corps recorded entire frequencies hijacked by unknown transmissions during the Ardennes offensive. Some messages were in perfect German, but when decrypted, they made no sense. Coordinates that led nowhere. Orders that no division ever issued. The Allies suspected psychological warfare, but post-war interrogations of German officers showed the same confusion. They too had received messages in flawless English, signed by non-existent commanders. Was it code interference, electrical resonance, or something the war itself had awakened in the world's expanding field of machines? Nobody could tell. But the pattern was undeniable. Wherever humanity built devices to manipulate energy, things began to appear that defied understanding. In late 1945, when Allied forces combed through captured archives, they found hundreds of references to anomalous readings. Japanese laboratories in Yokosuka had tried to measure it. Waves of unknown frequency recorded during USB-29 raids. German engineers documented power fluctuations minutes before massive air raids, identical to what British stations observed at the same times. Different continents, same pattern. The data implied something global, a kind of invisible resonance that pulsed with human conflict. For decades, skeptics dismissed it as wartime myth, but recently declassified memos from the U.S. Army's Technical Intelligence Division confirmed the phenomena were studied well into the 1950s under Project Phenomena 12. The conclusion was chillingly simple. High-energy warfare environments may induce unknown electromagnetic effects not reproducible in controlled conditions. Science had no further explanation. The war had ended, but its ghosts remained humming quietly in the circuits, flickering in radar screens, waiting for the next storm. By 1944, the Pacific was a graveyard of ships and machines, an ocean of secrets too deep for history to recover. The American advance toward Japan had turned the sea into a vast battlefield of steel and fire. But among the thousands of missions recorded, some remained unexplained. Pilots described storms that appeared without warning. Ships vanished from formation, and entire squadrons encountered phenomena no report could rationalize. The U.S. Navy began noticing the first signs during the Marshall Islands campaign. Patrol aircraft flying near Inawatch reported strange distortions in their compasses, like invisible magnetic walls that made needles spin violently. In one incident, a PB-4Y reconnaissance bomber vanished after sending a garbled radio message, "We can see the sun." The weather that day was clear. No wreckage was ever found. The Navy's Board of Inquiry cited navigational error due to fatigue, but in private memoranda, officers referred to magnetic anomalies inconsistent with known physics. The phenomenon grew more frequent as U.S. forces pushed west. In the waters south of Okinawa, entire destroyer escorts reported radar ghost ships that appeared on screen, moved in perfect formation, then faded away. On May 18, 1945, the USS Morrison's radar recorded 6 unidentified blips approaching from the north at 180 knots. Fighters were scrambled. The radar operator swore he saw them split into 2 groups before vanishing. 10 minutes later, kamikaze waves struck from a completely different direction. To this day, no one has been able to explain the false contacts. The same year, General Curtis LeMay, SB-29 crews, flying from Tinian Island, began logging luminous objects pacing their bombers at night. The pilots described orbs of light following their formation, orange, white, sometimes blue, moving faster than any known Japanese aircraft. They weren't tracers, they weren't flak, and they couldn't be outrun. Some seemed to play, hovering near the wings, then darting off into the clouds. The phenomenon became so common that crews gave them a name, fireballs. Declassified intelligence reports from 1945 show the U.S. Army Air Forces took the sightings seriously. At first, analysts suspected new Japanese secret weapons, perhaps remote-controlled aircraft or chemical flares. But captured Japanese scientists later denied all knowledge. In fact, they reported seeing the same lights tailing their own bombers. One Imperial Navy aviator described a ball of fire that followed our aircraft for 20 minutes. Then rose into the night sky and disappeared. In one chilling incident, a B-29 of the 29th Bomb Group disappeared entirely over the Philippine Sea after reporting contact with lights. The aircraft was fully fueled, crew experienced, weather calm. Rescue missions found nothing. Not a wing, not a body, not an oil slick. The last radio message read, "We are not alone up here." The war had already given humanity horrors beyond comprehension. Yet these stories carried a different kind of fear, the fear of the unknown. Pilots were trained to recognize everything in the sky: enemy fighters, flak bursts, weather balloons. What they saw didn't fit any of those categories. It defied instruction, defied physics, defied control. After the war, many of these accounts were quietly removed from official summaries. Some reappeared decades later through the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book files. One internal note described the wartime fireball reports as credible, consistent, and lacking conventional explanation. Even German and Japanese archives, seized in 1945, contain their own references to unexplained aerial phenomena observed during combat operations. The implication was unnerving. These sightings occurred independently, across all sides, in multiple theaters, under completely different command structures. But the Pacific had one more secret to give. In 1951, divers exploring wrecks near Truk Lagoon discovered something strange on the ocean floor. Fragments of aluminum alloy not matching any known U.S. or Japanese design. The metal resisted corrosion far beyond normal expectations, its molecular structure unusually tight. The discovery was logged by Navy salvage operations and later buried in a classified appendix titled Materials of Unknown Origin. To this day, those fragments are stored at a naval testing facility in Maryland. Skeptics claim it's all coincidence, stress, fatigue, the human brain overwhelmed by combat. And yet, when radar logs, flight transcripts, and multiple independent witnesses all tell the same story, coincidence becomes harder to defend. Even the scientists who studied these anomalies admitted one unsettling possibility. The war itself had created conditions humanity had never before produced: vast electromagnetic fields, explosions powerful enough to disrupt the ionosphere, and radar beams bouncing through layers of atmosphere never mapped before. Maybe those strange lights, those false radar echoes, those vanishing ships were the result of nature reacting to the scale of human violence. Or maybe, as some pilots believed, something was reacting to us. By the end of 1945, as the Pacific burned under atomic fire, the U.S. military quietly ordered all reports of unexplained phenomena classified, beyond top secret. The official reason: to avoid public panic. The unofficial one: nobody knew what they were dealing with. The war was ending, but for many, the truth was just beginning to disappear. In April 1945, as Allied forces closed in on the crumbling Third Reich, entire convoys of trucks left secret German research facilities under cover of night. Their cargo was not gold or weapons, it was people. Scientists, engineers, researchers, the minds behind Hitler's most ambitious projects. By the time American and Soviet troops reached those sites, laboratories stood empty, files burned, and some experiments, still humming quietly, abandoned mid-operation in the Harz Mountains. U.S. troops of the 3rd Armored Division discovered a vast underground complex beneath the town of North. Inside were dozens of V-2 rockets, half-finished jet engines, and something stranger, a chamber lined with ceramic tiles. The walls scorched black, filled with strange metallic residue. The logs called it Project Kronos. No detailed description survived. One witness, Sergeant Daniel Ford, later told a war correspondent, "It felt like we walked into a place where time itself had been tampered with." When investigators questioned captured scientists, most refused to speak. A few hinted that the SS had created special divisions for physics beyond weapons. The British called it nonsense, but in the chaos of post-war occupation, hundreds of German engineers vanished without record. The Soviets called it defection. The Americans called it recruitment. Both were partly right. Under Operation Paperclip, over 1,600 German scientists were secretly brought to the United States, including Werner von Braun, the creator of the V-2 rocket. Officially, they were engineers. Unofficially, many had worked on classified programs far outside conventional military research. When questioned about these other experiments, they deflected. One simply said, those projects never existed on paper. In the Soviet zone, similar disappearances occurred. Red Army troops captured the remnants of the SS Annenberg archives, crates filled with reports about energy experiments, archaeological expeditions, and medical research that defied logic. Some documents referred to energy resonance and dimensional harmonics, terms that made no sense even to Soviet physicists. Stalin ordered the archives sealed, and the scientists interrogated. Most never returned. Across Europe, witnesses spoke of abandoned bunkers emitting low mechanical hums weeks after the war's end. In Czechoslovakia, villagers near an old SS research base claimed to see lights glowing beneath the ground long after the Germans had fled. American patrols investigated but found only collapsed tunnels and twisted metal. The locals insisted the sounds continued for years. One of the strangest finds came from a mine near Nesto, Thuringia. U.S. Army engineers uncovered blueprints showing circular chambers far too large for weapons testing. The title page read Die Glocke VR6 Sandwich, Phase 3. When the papers were sent to Washington, they disappeared from the official record. Even the military courier's logbook was erased. When asked about it in 1952, a Pentagon archivist replied, "We have no such file," but perhaps the most haunting case was that of Dr. Wilhelm Richter, a physicist who worked at the Heeresversuchungs, Peenemünde, the Army's rocket center. After the fall of Berlin, he surrendered to American troops and cooperated fully. His reports described plasma propulsion, high-frequency oscillation fields, and experiments involving mercury-based rotation. Then, one morning in July 1945, Richter walked out of his holding camp in Bavaria and vanished. His room was undisturbed, his papers gone. The guard who last saw him said he looked calm, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Years later, declassified CIA memos referenced Project R, an investigation into post-war disappearances of German scientists, possibly involved in unconventional physics. The memos mentioned sightings of former SS researchers in Argentina, Chile, even Antarctica. Most were never confirmed. The most chilling discovery came from an American patrol unit near Innsbruck. They found an SS convoy destroyed by air attack. Trucks burned, bodies charred, but one crate survived. Inside were pages of equations, notes written in haste, and a final line in German. Man has opened a door that will not close. The deeper the Allies dug, the more they realized that victory hadn't ended the war. It had scattered its secrets. The Americans took what they could. The Soviets took what remained. What neither side ever explained was why some of those research facilities were still active when the war was already lost, why power generators were running with no personnel, why tunnels had been sealed with concrete poured from the inside. When the Cold War began, the story faded, hidden beneath nuclear fear and politics. But for those who were there, the memory stayed. The silence of underground halls, the smell of ozone and burned metal, the feeling that something enormous had happened and been deliberately erased. Today, historians speak of German technology as advanced, but conventional. Yet the documents tell another story, fragments of research so advanced that even post-war engineers could not replicate them. Whether it was science, madness, or something in between, no one knows. As the Allied soldiers left those mountains, they could not have imagined that the true legacy of the war was not only destruction, but mystery. The war had ended, but its ghosts had already begun to move. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the world believed the war was over. But inside certain offices in Washington, Moscow, and London, it was only beginning again, in shadows. The weapons were gone, yet the race for knowledge had just started. And the most dangerous secrets of World War II didn't lie in the ashes of Berlin, but in the minds of those who survived it. Across occupied Germany, Allied intelligence units were scavenging not for gold, but for documents. Operation Alsos, led by Colonel Boris Pash, hunted through ruined laboratories for clues about nuclear research, propulsion systems, and radar frequencies unknown to Western science. In April 1945, his team uncovered what remained of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. Most of the equipment had been stripped away, but in one underground chamber, they found fragments of uranium metal, a set of vacuum tubes, and a notebook filled with calculations in red ink, signed Dr. Kurt Debner. Those equations showed Germany had come closer to atomic success than anyone had admitted. Meanwhile, the Soviets were racing their own version of the same mission, Operation Soviet-Kim. In one night of October 1946, they forcibly relocated over 2,200 German scientists and engineers to Russia, entire families loaded onto trains, disappearing east. Many worked in closed cities near Moscow, building jet engines, rockets, and weapons the West would later fear. Those who resisted vanished entirely. But there were files that defied classification. In American archives labeled Special Scientific Operations, certain reports mentioned discoveries of uncertain origin. One such memo, dated September 1945, described metallic fragments found near Dresden. Alloy composition inconsistent with known wartime production. The fragments were sealed in containers and sent to Wright Field, Ohio today's Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. No public record of them exists after 1947. The same year, a coded cable from Moscow reported the capture of objects of unusual geometry at a facility near Prague. A Soviet engineer later recalled under interrogation that they were discs, metallic, seamless, not man-made. The statement was dismissed as hysteria, but it matched an earlier British intelligence note from occupied Czechoslovakia. Even at the time, no one dared publish those details. The aftermath of the war became an intelligence-feeding frenzy. Files, scientists, prototypes, all divided among victors who barely trusted each other. The Cold War wasn't just born from ideology. It was born from stolen knowledge. In that chaos, much was buried. At Los Alamos, physicist Edward Teller, one of the fathers of the hydrogen bomb, privately expressed concern about research he de-reviewed from German archives. He called it a different approach to controlled energy release. When questioned, Teller said no more. The report he cited remains missing. By 1948, both the US and USSR were testing devices that blurred the line between scientific progress and madness. In Nevada, the Americans detonated experimental bombs designed not for yield, but for data, studying atmospheric disturbances, radiation behavior, and strange electromagnetic effects. In the Arctic, Soviet researchers conducted similar experiments, sometimes losing aircraft to unknown radiation bursts. Each side believed the other was hiding something greater. The war had unleashed something beyond geopolitics, a hunger for knowledge unrestrained by ethics. And in that hunger, governments began reopening doors the Nazis had once built. The very same tunnels under the Alps that had terrified Allied soldiers in 1945 were quietly sealed again, this time by American engineers. A top-secret U.S. Army file later revealed that sections of the Jonastal complex were reinforced, not destroyed. Inside those bunkers, something continued. A different kind of war, invisible, silent, scientific. By the 1950s, veterans of Allied intelligence began speaking out. Colonel Philip Corso claimed that recovered foreign materials had inspired later technological leaps: fiber optics, integrated circuits, night vision. The military denied it all, yet the timing of those innovations was uncanny. The truth is that the Second World War never fully ended. It transformed from open battle to secret experimentation, from fire to calculation. And those who had seen what the world was truly capable of, those who had stood inside burning laboratories or sifted through strange wreckage, carried a truth that history never recorded. One American engineer wrote in a classified 1947 memo, "We have inherited knowledge that was not meant to exist." The war had changed everything, including humanity's understanding of itself. The bombs ended the fighting, but they did not end the search. Because behind every explosion, every vanished plane, every sealed file, there was a single, haunting question. What exactly had we discovered, and who had discovered it first? The war was over, but its shadows were only getting longer. By 1949, Berlin was a city divided not just by walls and ideologies, but by secrets. The Americans had taken scientists, the Soviets had taken entire factories, yet both sides hunted something else. Not men, not machines. Knowledge. Files recovered from Germany hinted at research beyond rockets and jets. Notes labeled gravitationsfeld, energical, unbekannte, Realcraft. Most historians dismissed them as pseudoscience, the delusions of a collapsing regime. But buried among the nonsense were details that demanded attention. Equations describing field propulsion, reports of test flights with no exhaust trails, and witnesses who swore they saw objects rise vertically without combustion. The Allies called these exotic propulsion studies, and officially they went nowhere. Unofficially, they never stopped. In 1952, a classified U.S. Air Force report described unidentified aerial objects exhibiting acceleration beyond current jet propulsion limits. The sightings were global: Japan, Norway, Argentina, the American Midwest. Every nation that had inherited fragments of German research suddenly found themselves staring at the same problem. Something was in the sky, and it didn't belong to anyone. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, engineers analyzed alloys recovered from what was publicly called experimental debris. Privately, they admitted the materials were unlike anything produced in wartime metallurgy: lightweight, heat-resistant, and impossibly strong. Across the Iron Curtain, Soviet scientists working under Lavrenti, Beria's direct supervision, reported the same thing. Their internal memo, declassified in the 1990s, described materials of unknown fabrication, exhibiting non-terrestrial isotopic ratios. The phrase was quickly censored, but there were more secrets hidden in plain sight. The American radar systems developed after 1945, capable of detecting atomic detonations, began picking up unexplained signatures, moving faster than any aircraft, often appearing over old wartime testing grounds: Peenemünde, Tinian, Nevada, Siberia. It was as if the ghosts of the war had learned to fly. For most, it was paranoia, the fever of a new nuclear age. But to a handful of intelligence officers who had seen the classified reports, the pattern looked too deliberate. In 1955, Project Blue Book was quietly launched to collect and explain these anomalies. Its conclusion, published years later, was a single phrase that raised more questions than it answered. No known technology could account for these observations. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the KGB formed its own investigation, Programa Sekha. One file, discovered decades later in the Soviet archives. Referenced research continued from Reich archives, recovered in Czechoslovakia. The connection was unmistakable. The war's most secret experiments, whatever they were, had survived, not as relics, but as blueprints for the future. And still, every government involved denied everything. Yet their actions spoke louder than their words. New defense budgets exploded in the 1950s. Radar networks spanned continents. Underground facilities were built in mountains, where the air was dry and radio signals vanished into silence. What exactly were they hiding from? For historians, the question is not whether these projects existed. The documents prove they did. The question is what they were truly searching for. Some call it energy. Some call it propulsion. Others believe it was something far more profound, an attempt to control nature itself. Even now, deep in the archives of Langley, Moscow, and London, hundreds of files remain sealed under national security exemptions. Requests for access are denied. Entire pages are redacted, with only one word visible: continuation. The Second World War was supposed to end in 1945. But perhaps wars never really end. They just change form. The laboratories are quieter, the weapons more invisible, the secrets more dangerous. Because maybe, in their desperate search for victory, humanity found something it wasn't ready to understand. And when it looked back from the darkness, whatever it was, it never left.